Hey there, my friend. This is Dr. Anthony Balduzzi, and I want to welcome you back to another great episode here on the Fit Father Project podcast. Today, we're joined by guest expert Dr. Parker Hayes. Dr. Hayes is a board-certified emergency physician with over 30 years of clinical experience. He's also the co-founder of the Lasting Impact Wellness Group, where he helps busy men, busy dads, busy executives, and high performers, particularly over 40, get into great shape and wellness, create a holistic health plan, and just perform in all areas of life. And this is a wonderful conversation where me and Dr. Hayes get into a lot of topics about high performance. We certainly talk about what it takes to transition and succeed in high pressure situations, how to restore your mind and body, the different habits to do, and of course, the different pillars of longevity that are really key for the prevention of the kind of diseases that Dr. Hayes sees in the ER all the time. And at the end of this conversation, we also talk as dads and as parents about what it takes to live a fulfilling life, to really be able to be healthy, not just in body, but also in mind and spirit, and the importance of purpose and finding your why. So I truly enjoyed this conversation. I think you're going to as well. So let's greet Dr. Hayes. Welcome to this podcast and enjoy this episode, my friends. Dr. Parker Hayes, welcome to the podcast, my friend. We're so happy to have you here.
My honor to be here, Dr. A. Thank you.
This is going to be fun. We're going to lean into your deep experience as a physician in emergency medicine, and now in what I perceive to be almost like the second birth of a very long medical career, where you're really zoning in on your experience and helping people with longevity and how to perform better, particularly men over 40, which is obviously what our Fit Father tribe is all about. And so as we get into this conversation, I'd love for you to give a little bit of background on your life and family, your life in medicine, your life as a dad, and your commitment to health, longevity, and performance.
Well, thank you for that opportunity. It's always humbling to think about the grand experiences and opportunities, really, that I've gotten through no merit of my own. I guess I would start by saying I grew up in a university town, and it was awash with experience. I was extremely lucky to have very educated and invested parents. And I was into everything from the get-go. I had tremendous exposures athletically, musically, intellectually, socially, and geographically. And things might have been going swimmingly, but my father got very ill, severely ill, and was chronically ill for a long time. And soon both my mother and father had chronic illnesses through my teen years and my decision-making process on what to do with my life. I also got used to sort of handling crisis situations emotionally and physically. And certainly in those days, if something needed fixing or built, then that fell to me, and I got used to doing those things. So when it came time to decide what to do, I guess I liked acutely fixing problems, staying up late and handling crisis. And that led me to medicine, and specifically to emergency medicine. But over the next 30 plus years in that field, in various locations, mostly based in Charlotte, North Carolina, but around the world, really, I met the world. The world comes to the emergency department. It is the great equalizer, whether you are rich, poor, black, white. It doesn't really matter who you are, because everyone will be there eventually. And we tend to get injured and sick in repeatable patterns with the very infinitely variable human aspect overlaid to each. So over those years, I started asking different questions. Why are you shot? Why are you overdosed? What choices or conditions or lack of opportunity have led you to being unwell in my emergency department today? I faced a lot of these questions myself, trying to be durable in an extraordinarily burnout-prone profession, and have hopefully addressed some of those. And I learned so much from the people that came to the emergency department, their extraordinary fortitude, their power under stress, their resilience. It was there as a lesson for me daily. So later, I decided, I had a bit of an epiphany. I was sitting at a cafe with my wife, who's also an emergency physician, and an ambulance went screaming past on a day. We were on a day off. And I thought to myself, I've spent 30 years knowing how to take care of anything that comes off that ambulance. I need to round out my career by spending the next years preventing people from ever having to get on it. So she, as an emergency physician, but also a yoga instructor and mindfulness expert, and I had years of experience as a professor, a mentor, and a residency director. We decided to combine forces, and we founded Lasting Impact Wellness, which is a company that's designed to help leaders of all types with their health and well-being to make them more durable and effective.
It is a beautiful journey. And I mean, I can only imagine, like my imagination is running as I'm thinking what it's like to spend 30 years in an emergency department between you and your wife. And now to make this pivot into the prevention side is so powerful. And I could genuinely hear, and I'm sure everyone else who's listening or watching could too, the humility in your voice from just what you've gotten to experience and be with people at some of their most scary and trying times. You've been there to save so many lives. I want to ask you a question. Have you seen a difference in what's coming into an emergency department, let's say when it was in the 90s versus the 2000s versus the 2010s and 2020s, like over this progression of time? Have things changed as we've gotten more or less generally more sick chronically?
The answer is yes and no. The no is the previously mentioned repeatability of people's patterns of injury and health. If I am in an emergency department in Abu Dhabi or in Charlotte or Chicago and someone breaks their arm, it's a broken arm, even if there are different conditions. But I also like to say that I've lived or practiced through four demics, three epidemics, a pandemic, and academics. And the predominant kind of underlying feature of a lot of emergency department presentations in parts of the 90s had to do with HIV, later the crack epidemic, later the pandemic of COVID, later the epidemic that we still are in now with opioids. But you've also seen a real transition in global, but in my case, mostly American populations with much greater obesity and the changes in metabolic health that have occurred. It's not just metabolic, but it's largely that. It also makes people tougher to take care of under certain circumstances, traumatic injury, et cetera, if they are unhealthy overall. So yes, I've seen a transition in the health of the population that generally comes in times seasonal or epi or pandemic ways, but also transitions in our overall societal health.
Mm-hmm. Now, I want to ask you now, shine a personal lens on you to make this a transition point into our discussion on the different pillars and concepts and practices of longevity. You mentioned, almost casually that this profession, ER physicians, burn out massively, long hours, high stress situations. Yet you had a very long career as an ER physician. So what did you figure out for yourself personally to create a greater degree of resilience, to create high performance, to be able to keep on showing up? Like, what drove you and how did you maintain such a high level of performance in a very, very crucial job?
Well, it's an excellent question. And I still am that emergency physician for some time longer. So on Monday at 6 a.m., I better show up because I'm on duty. But I find it curious at times that people act as though I'm a unicorn, that I'm still practicing nearly full time in emergency medicine after 32 years. But, I think there are complex and there are simple answers to the question. The simple answers first. I've heard you talk a lot about the why when it comes to your fitness journey.
Mm-hmm.
the why when it comes to a service or career journey is every bit as important. And figuring out why you go to work and what you're trying to accomplish certainly is sustaining in dark hours.
Mm-hmm.
I find it a very humbling service profession. I find it very grounding to hear about the entire socioeconomic strata of people that I get the chance to hear from and learn from every day.
Mm-hmm.
But from a personal standpoint, it has caused me over the years to pay greater and greater attention to how I move my body, what I put into my body, and what I put into my mind if I want to
Mm-hmm.
be able to be strong and show up correctly the next morning at 6 a.m. or at 3 p.m.
Mm-hmm. And maybe we can dive into some of those personal habits and practices that you have figured out with exercise, with nutrition, with restoration, in relation to some of the pillars that you now know to be true about creating wellness and preventing chronic disease. So what has worked for you in like, let's just say you got off a really long shift, you're absolutely fried. Like, what does the routine look like for you? What do you do personally with these practices?
We're designed to be stressed. We have very intact mechanisms as humans to run away from lions and tigers and bears.
Mm-hmm.
In our current degree of civilization, we may not face those named threats, but our body can't tell the difference between that and ridiculously difficult emergency department, a crash in the stock market, a
Mm-hmm.
fight with your partner. So we're designed to handle acute stress, boost our cortisol and epinephrine, and
Mm-hmm.
liberate glucose and fight that stress. But what we're
Mm-hmm.
not designed to do is stack stress. We're not
Yeah.
designed to take the stress, not finish that stress response, and add another, and then another, and then another. And then pretty soon you're operating at a much higher overall baseline level of those stress hormones, that stress milieu within your body. It
Mm-hmm.
causes wear and tear, it's breakdown.
Mm-hmm.
So completing the stress response, I think, is big.
Mm-hmm.
And that in the short term has to do with, let's say there was just a resuscitation or a code, or God forbid, a
Yep.
pediatric code or something bad. You need to finish that out and then get ready to reset. And we have a series of things we do, from breathing techniques to visualization to being willing to sit down and where you carry stress within your body at that time, and
Mm-hmm.
your own personal methods. In the slightly longer short-term decompensation, finishing out that stress response after a shift sometimes doesn't mean, okay, chill, man, just relax. It's got to
Mm-hmm.
lie down. Sometimes it's physical activity. I have
Right.
found myself doing jumping jacks in the physician call room where I keep my coat and briefcase, or
Mm-hmm.
knocking out some push-ups or something else, or cranking tunes in the car. There's some sort of continued manifestation of your sympathetic nervous system that needs to play out before
Yep.
you then come down to parasympathetics.
It seems powerful that like you have these discrete strategies to make transitions. And I apologize for cutting you off. I just want to ask, from the perspective of a busy parent, how could you see them helping make some of these transitions in their own life? Are they doing this in the car before getting home, after a meeting, doing some breathing visualization? Like, how do you apply this to people who are not in an emergency department?
Well, a terrific question, and something that I ask of myself all the time, because I'm wearing those hats too, as an
Mm-hmm.
administrator or teacher or parent, most of all.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, you don't know what's going to get thrown at you as a father, and
Mm-hmm.
you know that you're supposed to bring your A game with any of the situations. So, a series of mindfulness, being present in that moment. If your kid asks you a question, then answering that question and moving on to other things, and really engaging them on a personal level, which we all strive to do with varying degrees of success, is not different than me teaching a resident in the emergency department. Hey, man, there's not really so much multitasking going on here as really rapid serial monotasking.
Mm-hmm.
Get something done, move on to the next. But in the aftermath of stressful non-medical situations, the rituals may be very much the same. If you have a presentation, you have a job, you have a difficult commute, handling that stress and finding your own defensive mechanisms from a breathing, body, posture standpoint in the short term is critical. Finishing out stress responses is the next thing, but it all begins with some self-awareness. If you're not aware of what your body's doing, if we all took one moment right now and asked yourself, people listening to this podcast, they might be in their car, mowing the lawn, doing a workout, doing something else, but where are you carrying tension in your body right now? Can you feel your shoulders trying to get to your ears, or can you feel them relaxing down into a normal upright spinal position? And can you find those things? Can you finish the stress response after somebody cuts you off in traffic? Well, okay, finish that response and reset for the next. But then, of course, all those things are going to be, here's a critical one. In the medical field, I advise people to talk to people who understand. Talk to people who understand later, but as critically, talk to people who don't understand. If you just surround yourself in an echo chamber with other people who are in medicine, then you just hear about medical compensatory mechanisms and coping mechanisms. Finding people who don't understand may help you to reset to the normalcy of society in our interactions. And then lastly, and this is certainly very germane to the work you do for so many, long-term coping mechanisms are the same, whether it's emergency medicine, medical, you're the CEO of a business, you're the coach of a big basketball team, what have you, you're going to need to make yourself a complete athlete, if you will, in order to be resilient for a whole variety of different circumstances. And we can talk about those things at length, but having that background of your own infrastructure is going to be critical to handle each short-term stress.
Beautiful. And I do want to spend a good amount of time talking about those long-term strategies. And I want to summarize for people listening. There are discrete things that we can do in terms of breathing, posture resets, movements that are steeped in our awareness, and we can do them at these points throughout the day, these transition times to bring an end to a stress response. And when you're sharing that, it reminds me of an experience I have very regularly. I take my daughter and our dog to the dog park. And oftentimes at a dog park, there's all these dogs running around. They scuffle for a little bit. And after two dogs fight or yip at each other, they'll stop, and each one of them will shake it out. They'll do a little body shake, and it's like a reset of their nervous system being like, okay, that's over. Now I get back to the tail wag. And I think humans, we've just forgotten to do our version of that. And I think it's powerful awareness you're bringing in that we can do these things. And also, when I'm stressed, sometimes it's actually is doing more exercise. Like I went and hiked a mountain yesterday, and that was like physically taxing, but so like emotionally and spiritually restoring for me to be outside. So it's not always like doing less, as you said. I think that's a very powerful point. It's doing stuff that feels aligned and connected. So on that note, let's talk about some of the long-term strategies to make a more resilient, high-performing man and father. What are some of these pillars? And I'm sure they're also tied to longevity as well. Like, let's get into the longer-term perspective of this and how we design our routines, what we focus on, et cetera.
Yeah, for sure. The concepts of functional fitness are critical to me, and that means training for life, not training for specific gym-related tasks or sports necessarily. I've certainly spent a lot of time on a football field or an ice rink or in the gym, what have you, but those are methods to train for the rest of your life, not the other way around, for most of us anyway. My stress, first of all, is that exercise is great, but focus much more on 16 hours of movement and 8 hours of protected rest when it comes to functional fitness and longevity. Yeah. How you carry your body for those 16 hours, how much you de-automate your physical life, walking places, taking the stairs. There's the old joke about my wife asked me if I wanted to go upstairs and make love. And I said, honey, I can't do both. Well, If you took the stairs all the time and you really spent a lot of time cultivating your relationships, you would find that you probably can do both, and you might do both a lot more frequently. So I think of functional fitness as a symphony that has four movements. I've heard you in other settings talk about the trifecta of fitness, and I've added one more to that. So there are four movements in my version of functional fitness. There's move more, don't move, move harder, and move fully. And the first one is the most important, and that's move more. And that's to what I'm alluding right now. But constant movement through the day, walking, it doesn't have to be labeled exercise or be your 20 or 30-minute thing, although that's critical and wonderful. It needs to be standing up, getting down on the floor, playing with a child, picking stuff up. One of my chief hobbies on the side is I restore old cars. Well, you're going to get down on the ground over and over over and stand up. And if you do that on a dirty garage floor, or you do that in a documentary about centenarians in blue zones, you are getting down and you're standing up. So move more is number one. The second one is often overlooked, and that's don't move. And what that means to me is stability. The people that show up in my emergency department that have broken their hip, that have fallen on the stairs, that have slipped on the ice, that may not have been able to avoid a car accident. Basically, they moved when they were trying not to. So some efforts at increasing one's stability are very much a part of fitness. And the simplest and quickest way to begin is next time you're standing, stand on one foot, then stand on the other foot, and stand there as long as you can on one foot, and then work up to standing there with your eyes closed while you're doing whatever task might be amenable to that, listening to a podcast, brushing your teeth, what have you. But one's stability, especially stability under a variety of kinetic forces through the day, is a critical part of longevity-oriented or functional fitness. Number three is move harder. Well, I know you are a huge believer in this and practitioner, is you are never too old for resistance training.
For sure.
Never. I mean, even if you have bone conditions that are not amenable to loading axially or against different vectors, well, there are different ways to build muscle simply or with emerging technologies, even blood restrictive therapy, et cetera. So you're never too old for resistance training, and it's absolutely vital for your long-term fitness. And long-term means how well you're performing on your job at 42, but how well you're going to be performing at your great-granddaughter's wedding when you're 94. And the last one is move fully, and that certainly is flexibility. If you are wanting to get more flexible, just spend time with children and do what they do.
For sure.
And if your podcast is about fit fathers, all you need to do in most cases is keep your kid active and try to keep up. As long as your kid's not on the screen all day, then, hey, you try to keep up with most kids. My youngest two are 8 and 6. Hey, good luck, Parker, because it ought to be fun trying to keep up with them and on ice rinks and slippery surfaces and in and out of that day's created forts and tunnels. So getting down on the ground, getting up, moving all the time, practicing stability, practicing against resistance, and practicing through the entire full range of motions that our joints were granted at the beginning. That's functional fitness to me.
100%. And beautifully put with this symphonic analogy around that. I think it makes a ton of sense. One thing that I've personally noticed, at least on the stability front, and it actually helps me move more, is I've been spending a lot more time barefoot, taking my shoes off and getting my feet on the ground, and partly because I've been rehabbing a knee after a lot of trauma to my right leg, and I find that when I'm connected with my foot on the ground, my feet are strengthening, I'm activating my glutes more, and I also just feel like I want to move and bounce a little bit more on my standing desk. So just a prop to people. I think a lot of people wear some bad footwear, and getting yourself barefoot can be a good little addition to all this stuff. I don't know. Have you had any experience with that or any thoughts on that?
I've had a lot of thoughts on that at different times, especially as a 12-hour shift worker for so many years. I've had
Yeah, I'm sure you want some cushion after
plantar fasciitis, and I'm a marathoner. I've had problems where I have found myself moving towards more heavily cushioned footwear, more supportive footwear. But there's a lot to be said with the proprioceptive gains, meaning the balance and sensation gains from being barefoot. So I would view the foot as a great place to cross-train as well. Protect it when you need to, prevent injury when you can, especially under significant stressful times. But feel the earth, feel grounded, and feel it directly, if you can, to your benefit when you're not under those stressors.
Hey, it's Dr. Ray. I want to quickly pause this episode to thank you for listening to this Fit Father podcast. I am just blown away at how amazing this podcast has become. I had no idea when I started FFP around 10 years ago that it would grow into such an impactful mission. And I want to let you know that I am so grateful to be connected to you in this lifetime. And on behalf of me and my entire team, we are so grateful to be in your life, helping you get and stay healthier for your family. That's what I want to share. Just some gratitude from my heart to yours. Let's get back to today's episode. I want to ask you about the brain and cognitive health as we age. It seems to me, and I don't have the exact statistics on it, but we are seeing an increase in cognitive decline, dementia, Alzheimer's related things. I have a sense that it's related to our poor cardiometabolic health. What is your take on this, and what can we counsel people to do to keep a very healthy brain as we age and just keep the mind and the intellect as sharp as possible?
Well, first of all, from the shameless plug department, we just did 2 parts of a podcast with a neurologist on our podcast on this very topic. And, it's a topic that frankly can be ominous and depressing for some people because they view it fatalistically. The answer, as I think implied in your question, is you absolutely can and should do things to mitigate your risk, to reduce your risk. One of which is what's good for the heart is good for the brain. You alluded to that in metabolic health and vascular health. Your brain gets its entire energy from the bloodstream. So the healthier you can keep that delivery and what gets delivered, the better your chances are of maintaining brain health. Other tenets of fitness apply here. Use it or lose it. If you are exercising your brain well from a cognitive standpoint already, from an educational standpoint, from a lifelong learning perspective, even if you don't have the formal letters behind your name, we all can be lifelong learners and curious and interested and forward thinking. Again, alluding to the blue zones, one uniform thing that they found in people there was that they tended to talk a lot about the future and not talk a lot about the past. It's a forward-looking thing. And lastly, the thing that probably correlates the strongest with reduced dementia risk is exercise. And that has been a real eye-opener for me over the course of my career, but also when I talk to patients about it today, is that if you are working out, you're protecting your brain, even though it really feels as though you're just exercising your somatic body, your muscles, joints and bones and nerves. Well, guess where those all communicate each day? Directly with your brain and in mechanisms that we partially understand and in many ways don't. It has a protective, exercising, and fortifying effect on the brain itself over time.
Nice. Yeah, a great high level summary of a deep topic, and reinforces the cool thing about all this is our desire is to have a body that looks and moves well, consistency, fulfilling relationships, a sense of purpose, and all of this kind of ties in together, these core daily habits of awareness of more movement. And now I want to ask you about the food and nutrition side of things, especially from your medical background. It's an interesting landscape right now where there's so much different and honestly potentially conflicting when you get into the weeds information about what kinds of foods are good for longevity. People are screaming on completely opposite poles of the spectrum. Where do you fall in terms of which foods or an approach to nutrition is helpful for somebody for well-being, longevity, and also maybe layer in any sustainability aspect, like what you've discovered and what you may counsel people on what and how to eat in whatever way you want to approach that question?
Yeah, this is a landmine because people are so passionate about relatively narrow diets,
Yeah.
and because so many people are concerned about it, I certainly respect that aspect of it. I don't believe in diets particularly. I believe in systems of eating,
Yeah, me too.
and I definitely don't believe that one size fits all.
Mm-hmm.
I happen to follow mostly a plant-based diet. It works
Mm-hmm.
for me. It makes me feel better. I have other, perhaps non-dietary or non-selfish reasons. I like to think that I don't eat certain things from an environmental standpoint and so forth. But I sure like those foods when I do go there,
Mm-hmm.
and I don't feel dramatically dogmatic or exclusionary about my system of eating either. But knowing where you fall metabolically, knowing where you fall from an energy and sustainability of energy standpoint is going to guide your eating to some degree. I
Mm-hmm.
absolutely would agree with things I've heard you and others espouse, which is whole food eating. Foods that look like they did when they first were made by the earth. I'm a big fan of the adage that if it's a plant, you can probably eat it. If it was manufactured in a plant, you probably ought to think twice. And so things that have been highly processed, had chemicals added to them, uh, have been modified dramatically. And hey, look, I'm a physician. You are a doctor that has seen all kinds of chemistry. I don't even know what these things are on these labels. I mean, it if I don't really know what it is, then I probably shouldn't be eating it. So
Yeah,
you hear people talk about the perimeter of the grocery store or
for sure.
the Whole Foods or the great grandmother test. If your great grandmother wouldn't
Mm-hmm.
know what it was or wouldn't have eaten it, well, I don't know. I never knew my great grandmother, but I bet there were some things in her farm kitchen that I probably wouldn't have been excited about. But uh, the fact of the matter is that Whole Foods, and whether they are plant or animal based, that are devoid of heavy processing, is certainly where I land.
Nice. And what is it? Can you run us through some of your go-to meals, like what you may have for breakfast, lunch, snack, and dinner? If you do any fasting, like what's some like average, good, healthy go-to meals in your life? I am curious about that.
I think that we are largely, especially as we age, we may not get enough good protein. Now
Mm-hmm.
people think they're getting plenty of protein, but unfortunately, it has an entourage of unhealthy fat and other
Mm-hmm.
things around it, or other macronutrients that bring it out of balance when they achieve more and more protein. Uh, some specific things that I eat, I do eat eggs if I have uh, eggs, and I have some whole grains accompanying it in the morning.
Mm-hmm.
Oat milk. I'm a tea drinker. I did some time in London and got hooked on tea instead of coffee. But so eggs, whole grains that are not processed with a lot of extra sugar accompanying that are probably staples for me in the morning if I do
Mm-hmm.
eat breakfast, which is not always.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I eat fish, other protein sources there, but even fish. Let's say you're eating a lot of fish because you eschew land mammals, what have you. Well,
Yeah.
you need to be thinking about Where your fish comes from is
For sure.
the amount of toxins in some farm raised fish if you're eating it in large numbers. And let's say you don't eat meat because you're concerned about the environment. Well, farmed shrimp, for example, is really high of concern in the um, basically CO2 footprint compared to other farmed creatures as well. So be careful not to get too heavy into labels and reasons behind your food choices without really knowing the facts and having a good variety of possibilities. Whole fruits and vegetables certainly are go-tos for me at any given time. I
Mm-hmm.
originally grew up in Illinois, so that corn outside, I may not love it if it's overly processed and turned into bad things, but a whole ear off the vine in the late summer, off the stalk, really, it can't be beat. It's a whole food right there.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I think another example of mistakes sometimes people make is healthy foods that are labeled plant-based but are basically a pressed and overly processed uh, bar that has
Yeah.
catchwords on it like protein or um, cholesterol free or sort of meaningless
Mm-hmm.
things ascribed to it. Well, it was made in a plant. It isn't a plant. And so I realize again it's a landmine, but eat whole, eat
Mm-hmm.
plain, eat varied, get an idea of what your own metabolic health is and what your own metabolic needs are together with a healthcare professional, and then start navigating the very complex ideas such as your own gut microbiome, your metabolic and lipid markers, other things like that that may guide choices going forward.
Nice. I appreciate that rundown. What are some of the around the corner exciting advancements in medicine as it relates to longevity and extending lifespan? We have people on this planet right now that believe they're going to live to 300 years old. We have lots of things that are being played around with using blood, using stem cells, new gene therapies. What are you seeing happening on this longevity front in terms of advancements, and maybe speak into what you see things being like 5, 10 years from now, 20 years from now, 50 years from now, as far out as you want to kind of future cast this? And I know a lot of this is conjecture, but I'm just really interested in your take.
It's an immense question. The first thing I'd say is I'm excited. It's really exciting, the things that are happening today. I'm excited for myself, selfishly. I'm excited for those around me, slightly less selfishly. I'm really excited for my children and their
Mm-hmm.
generations. Experts soberly say that some of the first people to live to be 150 years old are possibly alive today or being born. That a large percentage of children right now being born will live to be greater than 100. Well, those are the kind of statistics that sound really terrific, but whoever says them won't be around long enough to know if they're wrong. Uh, I plan to, and I've had some health issues, minimal, but I've tried to abate them or modify them over time, and I'm excited. What do I see that's really coming? First of all, awareness. Things like your work, things,
Mm-hmm.
uh, there are things that we talk about today that weren't even in the conversation 10 years ago, 15 years ago. Did you ever see somebody in yoga pants 20 years ago? They wouldn't even allow
No.
yoga in my local YMCA because it wasn't really widely practiced and or it was quasi-religious and you had to be careful. And now yoga is very widespread. People know about omega-3 oils or uh, I think there are so many advances if we just rewind the tape 10 years and extrapolate it forward at an even faster rate 10. It's going to be a very different landscape. So, more specifics. I think as we understand a lot more about the genetic and epigenetic basis of aging, sirtuins and
Mm-hmm.
telomere length and
Mm-hmm.
Some of those, I think, are just the manifestations that we see. mTOR, for example. And for listeners that don't know what any of those things are, they're either genetic or biochemical markers or conditions within cells that are associated with either rapid aging or the delay of that aging. And we've
Mm-hmm.
found ways to modify them. A lot of those ways, though, are not sexy. They're not a pill. They're not even a pill found on Easter Island and isolated later, even though that really could be a dramatic breakthrough.
Mm-hmm.
They are things like moving your body, the quality of your diet, the cultivation of your social relationships, the impact on one's longevity to not be lonely, to
Yeah.
have stable relationships, to have a sense of purpose in life. It's really profound. Earlier
Mm-hmm.
in this conversation, well, what do you do to prevent dementia? You work out, you be a nice person, you volunteer, you spend time with others and cultivate your relations. This is not going to be something you pick up at the pharmacy, but we've demonstrated that it has really demonstrable effects on some
Yeah.
of the major causes of death and demise, like dementia.
Mm-hmm.
So we will find ever more advanced things. I wear a sleep monitor ring and I know my resting heart rate and heart rate variability. And I
Mm-hmm.
have my own few supplements that I take and I study the data behind all those things, cellular, biochemical enhancements and things that might turn on or off genetics. But it's all a big waste of time if you are not attending to the major pillars of fitness and health. To round that out, I started by saying I'm really excited, and I could go into a lot of those things in great depth, but uh, we're finding out about a lot. But if you're not healthy and you're not doing what you can now to be in the healthiest stance possible, you won't be in a position to avail yourself of the eventually emergent technologies that are around the corner.
Yeah. I mean, and maybe that now gets incorporated into someone's why for being healthy, and all the reasons just to be around to experience and see the future promise of medicine coming into the present moment. It is a very exciting time to be alive for sure. And I think it is also fascinating how, like, when we look out into nature, things see somewhat fractal. We have like cells, small cells that make up big cells, and our planet almost can be considered a cell of a larger galaxy, which is a cell of a larger solar system. And maybe those are the flip flop, but you get the idea. And so to live a long life, we must keep our cells healthy, and the signals that keep them healthy are the good nutrients, the lack of the toxins, the consistent movement, exercising and stressing our mitochondria to help them be strong and healthy and robust. And I think it's funny when we have AI around the corner, robotics, things becoming more automated. You made the admonition to us to be careful with that and become less automated with your daily tasks, to walk more, to move more, to allow convenience and efficiencies to come in certain areas. But when it comes to the body, it still needs these inputs. And I don't think there's going to be a pill that you can take that solves all these things. But in understanding and your effort certainly can. I want to ask you now and kind of transition our conversation to speak to you as a physician and as a dad and as a man over 40. We are going into a time where I think like mental health, mental well-being, and like trauma, these were kind of like buzzwords of 2022, 2023, where people are starting to like realize, oh man, like these feelings have a profound impact on me, and we don't have to bottle them up, and we could look deeper into the roots of some of our mental emotional issues and traumas and heal those and then express better. So I kind of want to ask you about, to speak into men's mental health, like what are you seeing going on? What are some of the ways that you've worked through mental and emotional challenges in your life, and what strategies do you promote to help men with emotional well-being and resilience?
Terrific questions. It definitely speaks to the why. I think, first of all, it's helpful to note some background. Men don't like, in general, to talk about this, at least stereotypically. They don't always attend to their own relationships as they should. They don't express their feelings as well as they might. But sometimes if they know why they should, they understand the depth of importance to their own longevity, but also to its impact on others, that softens their approach a bit. If they know the importance they're having as a dad, they sometimes wind up better dads.
Mm-hmm.
They don't always get all the how, but they know the why, and that's a great first step. If you learn that good relationships, stable relationships, caring for others is preventative of long-term illness, well, hey, there's a good reason right there. It
Mm-hmm.
makes you less selfish in your pursuits, and those are immensely more durable. I know you would agree that it's one thing to work out when you're 22, so that in my case, I'm 20 years old, I'm working out to be attractive to the opposite sex or to play well on the football field. Man, I've never worked out like I work out once I started working out to live forever. I'm not going to live forever, but to live for as long
Yeah,
as I can for my children, for my
for sure.
relationships, for my patients, for my life. That's where you get real gains. Your why
Mm-hmm.
is what's going to drive you. So, the importance of your mental health is, it begins with the why, but in many ways, it's the ultimate why. I find myself in the study of aging and longevity, especially when I interact with other people, who we all ask the question, what's the point, man? Like, what's the point? Why does it matter if I live to be 95 or 90 or 85? And it doesn't matter any if you're just going to rack up numbers without good cognition and relationships. So, in many ways, that's the ultimate answer. The
Mm-hmm.
answer is know your why, because your why is the point, and it will help you more than anything else in sustaining your durability.
Yeah, and for me, just reflecting on your life and what I've got to learn about you through this conversation, your why is deeply rooted in service, and otherwise you wouldn't be showing up to the ER all these years later because you genuinely want to help people. And then also in your own personal growth, in this humble aspect of getting to learn from people and help people of all socioeconomic stations. And I can't help but think part of the life journey is at first to focus on ourselves and build ourselves up, and then in some way, shape, form, or fashion to come to the understanding and awareness that there is far more than just our own personal building up, that we are a part of a great symphony of life, and that we can use our time constructively to help other people. And so service ends up becoming an ongoing why and motivation that never has an end to it. I think our own personal glory can have an end to that, but to the idea of goodness, I think is a generative idea that we can tap into, and it adapts with us. Like the great great grandmother holding her great great granddaughter is still able to do goodness and service, even if she can't really get up from the chair that well. So, what do you think about this idea of goodness and service and how that interplays both in your own personal experience, but even like philosophically?
I think it's almost everything. Uh,
Mm,
my father was an immense force in my life. He taught me those kinds of things, but taught them to me in example, most of
mm-hmm.
all. So did my mother, but their his life was cut short. And so therein lies two lessons. One is here's how you do it right. And second is here's, unfortunately, a negative example of how you could have done it a lot longer to so much
Mm-hmm.
more benefit. Well, how do you have that cake and eat it too? You continue the ethos of service, of goodness, but you find ways to do it with sustainability, and your
Yeah.
effect is going to be dramatically magnified. Lastly, is you want to really magnify it, teach somebody else to do it.
Right.
Again, by example or not. And it's the work that you do every day, all the people you've helped, and countless others that you doubtless have helped, Dr. A, that you'll never know their names and you'll never meet them or know anything about them. But that goodness is pretty much the whole point and why you want to live a long time. I don't want to live longer so I can not know what's going on in a nursing home or
Yeah.
be all by myself and on a mountaintop necessarily. Not that other people might want to, but I want to live a long time so that I can continue to feel the collective joy of societal and familial connections.
Beautiful. One of my favorite experiences is one that I just got to share with you is feeling the things that are so apparent and true to me in my heart, like the truest stuff, and to know that that's also in your heart and the person listening to this heart, and like we feel that shared connection. I think that's the bond in the spirit of the shared human experience. And that's how we can really love and connect with one another. Even if we don't know the facts of each other's lives, we know that we're on the similar resonance to our understanding of these deeper cuts of life. And another thing I think I'll speak to the men's mental health. I've become a huge fan in my healing of becoming very vulnerable and telling the truth. Because I think when we bottle things up or we don't tell the truth and we don't express things truthfully, it's almost like the equivalent of getting the nervous system into a tensioned, holding on chronic state where we have to ball up and we can't be the relaxed, parasympathetic, settled in, not trying to do anything above the baseline selves and versions of ourselves. Where's it come with you? And I guess, may I ask you more about your if you've had an experience of any of your, we'll just call it moral, not might not be the right word, but like development as a man in your character and virtue. Like, are there any pivotal experiences that you've gone through or practices that you hold dear to cultivate virtue? And it's very apparent to me, you are well-spoken, deeply thoughtful, service oriented. So I know there's some stuff here that has been powerful for you.
Well, that's a very in-depth and thoughtful question, and thank you for the kind words. But frankly, Dr. A, I'm not proud of everything I've ever done.
Okay.
I've definitely had moments where I have fallen off in my uh, compass direction, if you will. But if what's way worse than doing that is not learning from it, not seeking to course correct, and not doing better next time. It's a frequent preaching for me, for my residents or medical students, that two things. One is just because you get away with it doesn't mean you did it right. And the second thing is just because you did it right doesn't mean you couldn't do it better next time.
Mm-hmm.
That's what practicing medicine is like, but that also is what doing almost anything is like. And I can clearly tell you that I have not done it right many times, but gotten away with it. And sometimes not gotten away with it, frankly. You just ask my dad if he were still around. But anyway, the fact is that if I practice what I preach there and say, okay, well, I got away with it, but I need to do it better next time, it has guided me the next time. And that's the restoration of the compass's direction. And just because I did it right, okay, that time doesn't mean that I'm not seeking to get better in that stance of lifelong learning that we mentioned before. So mistakes are going to happen. Man, I've made some awful ones, awful ones. People have gotten hurt. But the thing that would be way worse is if it just stopped there. I've hopefully been able to turn some of them around and use them to the benefit of myself and others. And it's put some salve on my memories wounds.
Mm-hmm.
I think building more memories going forward that are of a positive nature is the best way of all.
Yeah, that was beautifully said. And I think, at least for me, it puts a nice kind of wrap up and capstone on our discussion. What you just described, I've heard coined the term the growth mindset, the mindset that is like the centenarians, future pacing, that has a root of humility that, you don't have it all figured out, but is always trying and striving to be better, is flexible and fluid, has this positive energy versus the fixed mindset, which is protecting a small, limited identity that is rooted in some amount of fear or contraction. The fixed mindset is the mindset that people say, oh, I'm too old for that, or I can't do these things. Oh, I have a bad knee or shoulder, so I can't exercise anymore. Where the growth mindset is getting you to restore a car when you're 70, finding new ways to exercise that continue to go with your age, finding new hobbies and stuff to learn into. And as we discussed in this conversation, that's literally what is going to activate your cellular health, these longevity genes and pathways, greater cognition, So it kind of comes down to like a good daily routine plus purpose plus the right mindset. And I think you're a shining example of that. And so I appreciate you coming on and sharing this with us today. And I also do want to say, I'd like to give you the floor back one more time to give us a little capstone if there's any final message you'd like to leave us with. But I also would love people to be able to connect with you more. If they're just interested in learning about Lasting Impact, your wellness group, the kind of work that you do too, because I think people are probably curious about that. Like, what does it actually work if I want to connect with Dr. Hayes and like see more about what does he and his wife do in terms of prevention and wellness optimization? Like, speaking to that and then a final message, that'd be wonderful.
Well, I've heard Dr. A say, "You're not over the hill. You just need a new strategy." And
Yeah, for sure.
One of my favorite quotes. I would give a plug to a book that I recently wrote. I have no connection to it at all, by Arthur Brooks, Strength to Strength, that talks about the transition one makes in life in the first half and the second half, and how you just you find versions to reinvent yourself that are more service and sustainably oriented, and it doesn't lessen you, it lengthens you, but you need a new strategy. And that's in many ways what you're saying. The work that we do can be found, I guess, in web form at lastingimpactwellness.com. And we do a whole variety of things with different types of clients. But what we focus on the most is finding a better version of oneself. Many of our clients are crushing it in one aspect of their life and neglecting another, starting with the self-awareness to find out what those areas are, and then bolstering the others without sacrificing performance in the ones that are thriving is what we do. And it is a holistic but physician-driven and science-driven approach.
That sounds super cool.
You can always find us at info@Lasting Impact Wellness. And we, of course, would welcome any of your listeners to our podcast as well, Lasting Impact Wellness, on all major platforms. I would say that what we're doing right now is curious because it's digital. It's by definition coming out of your computer or your phone or your car radio most all the time, and therefore pushes people towards screens and media. And I love that. It can be a very positive tool for social growth. But the underlying message I would bring you with me as far as what we're trying to do is promote greater real interpersonal health and finding the goodness between us, as you very eloquently described just a little while ago, is ultimately to what we're all striving. The last take-home message I would give is, if I haven't seen anything else in 32 years of medicine and years before that as a medic and traveling around as a itinerant backpacker through various continents, is it's really all connected, and it's really all connected in a synergistic and positive way. If you exercise, you tend to eat better. If you exercise and eat better, you tend to sleep better. If you sleep better, especially next to the right person, you might have more loving relationships or more exercise, and round it goes. Very, very infrequently have I found things that if you improve one aspect of your health and well-being, it doesn't have a positive effect on everything else. In fact, it's very much the opposite. I plan to be healthy and positioned well through the tenets and pillars of well-being now to avail myself of the eventual technologies, not the other way around. I'm not going to tear it down and hope to be bailed out. And I hope to cultivate my relationships and the goodness that we practice with our minds each day in order to feel great physically and enjoy all those things as well. So everyone needs to feel the synergy of it all and just begin somewhere to realize all the other wide-reaching benefits.
I got some chills at the end there. That was really well said. Very beautiful. And this conversation meant a lot to me. I'm inspired by your life. I'm excited for what's ahead. And I'm grateful you can come on the podcast today. Dr. Hayes, thank you so much.
It's really been my honor, Dr. A. Thank you for the great work you do.